While the French nobility focused on the glory of the charge, the Spanish were perfecting a much more cynical form of warfare. Enter the arquebusier. These weren't the gunners of the previous century. By 1525, the Spanish had turned gunpowder into a disciplined science. The Spanish arquebus was a matchlock, a weapon that used a slow-burning cord to drop a spark into a pan of priming powder. It was clumsy, it was slow to reload, and in the rain, it was a literal paperweight. But at the Battle of Pavia, the conditions were perfect. The Spanish infantry, under the command of the Marquis of Pescara, didn't stand in rigid, static lines like the archers of old. They operated in escopeteros, small, mobile skirmishing squads. As King Francis I and his elite gendarmes charged into the Mirabello hunting park, they hit a disaster. The ground was a marshy, wooded mess. The heavy cavalry, encased in the most expensive, white armor ever forged, became bogged down. This is where the physics of the 1500s changed forever. A Spanish arquebusier would carry a heavy lead ball, roughly .60 to .75 caliber. Unlike an arrow, which loses energy as it flies and can be deflected by the rounded surfaces of a breastplate, a lead ball at close range is a different beast. It doesn't just hit the armor, it delivers a massive, blunt force shock. At Pavia, the Spanish gunners did something that horrified the French. They aimed for the horses. By dropping the mounts, they turned the invincible knights into helpless turtles, trapped in 60 pounds of steel in the mud. Once a knight was down, the gunners moved in, pressing the muzzles of their arquebuses directly against the gaps in the helmet or the armpits. There is a specific horror to Pavia. To the French knight, being killed by another noble in a duel was an honorable end. But being killed by a peasant who had spent only 2 weeks learning how to load a pipe with powder, that was an insult to the entire social order. The Spanish used a rolling fire tactic, one rank firing while the other reloaded, creating a constant curtain of smoke and lead. The French knights couldn't even see the men who were killing them. The 15th century invincibility of plate armor was shattered not by a better sword, but by the sheer industrial efficiency of the Spanish shot. While the French king slept in his silk-lined tent, the imperial army was doing the unthinkable. The hunting park of Mirabello was surrounded by a massive stone wall, a barrier Francis I thought was his shield. He was wrong. Under the cover of a thick, freezing fog, imperial sappers and Spanish soldiers didn't use cannons. They used hammers and crowbars. For hours, they worked in near silence, dismantling the wall stone by stone. By 4 a.m., 3 massive breaches had been opened. As the sun began to rise on February 24th, ironically, the emperor's birthday, 6,000 Spanish soldiers and German Landsknechts poured through the gaps. The French camp didn't wake up to a bugle call. They woke up to the sound of their own perimeter collapsing. The night move had begun, and by the time Francis I could scramble into his armor, the Spanish were already inside the park. But the French had a secret weapon of their own, the Black Band. These were 5,000 renegade Landsknechts, German mercenaries who had betrayed the emperor to fight for French gold. When the imperial Landsknechts saw them across the field, the battle became personal. This wasn't just war, it was a corporate execution. The 2 massive blocks of pikes collided with a sound like a forest splintering. This was push of pike at its most brutal. Neither side gave quarter. In the center of the park, these 2 mercenary armies tore into each other until the Black Band was almost entirely annihilated. In the history of the 1500s, this was the bloodiest family feud ever recorded. But while the mercenaries slaughtered each other, the French king was making a fatal tactical error. Francis I, seeing his lines waver, did what a medieval king was born to do. He charged. Leading the gendarmes, he smashed into the imperial cavalry, but the Spanish arquebusiers we discussed earlier were waiting. The king's horse was shot out from under him, trapped under the weight of his own dying mount. The most powerful man in Europe was suddenly just a man in a metal suit pinned to the mud. A Spanish soldier named Juan de Urbieta lunged forward to kill him, but Francis cried out, "I am the king. Save me." The Spanish didn't know whether to bow or stab him. They settled for stripping the jewels from his fingers and the feathers from his helmet as trophies. The King of France was now a prisoner of war. The war didn't just end that morning. The French monarchy was decapitated. The aftermath was a humiliation. Francis was hauled off to a dark tower in Madrid. To buy his freedom, he was forced to sign away Burgundy, Flanders, and his claims to Italy. He even had to send his 2 young sons to Spain as hostages. But the real impact was deeper. Pavia proved that the age of the heroic king was over. Success on the battlefield no longer belonged to the man with the longest lineage, but to the nation with the most gunpowder and the best drilled infantry. The Holy Roman Empire was now the undisputed master of Europe, and the Spanish tercios, those mixed units of pike and shot, would remain undefeated for over 100 years. Pavia was the funeral of the Middle Ages. It was the last time a king would lead a charge of armored knights with the genuine hope of winning the day. From 1525 onward, war became an industrial process. The knight became a soldier. The castle became a fortress, and the sword became a secondary tool to the gun. We look back at Pavia not just as a battle, but as the moment the modern world was born out of the smoke of a matchlock. Francis I lost his honor in the mud of a hunting park, and Europe found a new, more violent way to live. Would you have survived the day the knights died? Before we get back to the slaughter, we have to talk about the most colorful men on the field, the Landsknechts. These German mercenaries were the rock stars of the 1500s. They wore slashed clothing, cutting slits in their silk doublets to pull the bright lining through in puffs. Why? Because their lives were short and brutal, and they wanted to spend their gold on the loudest, most offensive outfits possible. But don't let the feathers fool you. Underneath the silk was a Katzbalger short sword and a cold, professional heart. At Pavia, the Landsknechts weren't just fighting for territory. They were fighting to prove they were the premier mercenaries in the world. When they met the Black Band, their own countrymen who had turned traitor, the battle turned into a literal meat grinding.
Wir zogen in das Feld. Wir zogen in das Feld. Da hätten wir weder Säckel noch Geld. Alla mi presente al vostra signori. Wer war es, der die Lorbeer brach und ihn an seine Kappe stach? Ich will's euch offenbaren. Wir riefen das Kreuz vom Himmel an, wir frommen Landsknecht alle. Es war an einem Montag, als der Sturm auf Münster anbrach, wohl um die 7. Stunde. Da blieb so mancher Landsknecht tot vor Münster in der Runde. Zum Sturm war es nur kurze Zeit, bis die Mette war bereit. Die Mette war gesungen, dann schollen sie los, der Böse drein. Alarm, so schlug die Trommel. Die Landsknecht war in großer Not, da blieben wohl 3000 tot. In anderthalben Stunden